Hello, this is Brian Courtney with the Short Bus Debate Club. Thanks for listening. Um, as always, I'm here with Darren Jolly, and this week we are
Hi.
here to talk about education as a whole, I guess, but the education institution as we know it, and what we've been through, and all of that good stuff. So, Darren, what do you got to say?
Oh, I have a lot to say about education or diseducation. I mean, whether it's higher education, proprietary education, K through 12, um, it's really it's hard to imagine a system that pretends to put forward certain intents and outcomes just to set a stage like for so I just finished my undergraduate at at Metro. It was Metro State College of Denver at that time. It had not become Metro State University yet, and I had a degree in international relations. My minor was in philosophy. It was an honors degree. Um, awesome education. Like I found some really cool professors down there. Really lit me on fire, to be honest with you. Nick Morales, Robert Hazan. These people were really quite instrumental in me finding some cool directions with regards to my own thoughts. But I graduated and I didn't really know what the hell I was going to do with myself. So um, I was kind of sitting around. I had some friends that were tutoring in Cherry Creek Public Schools at the time. Um, and it's called avid tutoring. Avid tutoring is critical thinking tutoring where you go in and you do what they call Socratic seminars. Socratic seminars, the kids are supposed to bring in three questions and the questions are either they're on three levels. They're either straight informational, like is this right, is this wrong, is this true, is this not true. They can be comparative. That would be the second level, and then the third level, which is more dynamic. You're sort of taking all the information you have about a topic, you're putting it inside of your mind, and you're recreating an analysis of that topic through your own lens, right? Um, like I said, I just finished a degree in international relations. The kids that I was working with were primarily they were between sixth and ninth grade. I went to four different schools to do the tutoring, and this was during the build up to Iraq 2, right? And we had not started the actual military operations yet. But as a person who had a degree in international relations, when I would talk to the students, they'd watch this show called Channel One in the morning, and the show it's essentially for all intents and purposes it was a propaganda piece. Like you're pushing kids in specific directions that are a part of the entire social mechanism that advances specific logics, right? So, for instance, in this case, right, in the build up to Iraq 2, one of the things that was posited was that our fine feathered friend Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction munitions factories in the form of chemical and biological warfare capabilities, right? So one morning on Channel One, there were these satellite photos that were showing these train cars that were moving allegedly in Iraq, right? And what was being suggested on Channel One was that these were the munitions sites that were being sent from one city to another so that Saddam could always have his capabilities on the move and nobody could catch up with them. And these things were, he's just very dynamic, twisting his mustache and all that kind of stuff. Um, so because I was the international relations guy, um, kids would tend to bring their questions to me about these things, and we'd be sitting there, and you have 6 or 7 kids there, and my goal is my responsibility is to facilitate the conversation between the students. It is not my goal or my responsibility to tell these kids what to think. I'm supposed to help them to converse with each other so that they can get to these higher levels of thinking through the discussions that they're having with one another, right? So this one kid, I'm at West Middle School in Cherry Creek at that time, and this one kid, uh, he brings up this Channel One thing in the morning, and he says, "What what do we make of or how do we respond to these acts that Saddam's committing in the form of like developing these chemical and biological weapons?" And I said, what chemical and biological weapons are you referring to? He says, you saw the Channel One thing this morning. You said it. It was those satellite photos. I said, I saw satellite photos. that were allegedly of train cars that were moving. I don't even know what they were train cars, where they were from. I was like, so this is something that I'm looking at, I'm seeing, but like help me along with the evidence a little bit further. So the kid says, what do you mean? I said, well, so if there's something in there that's demonstrating that they're these munitions factories, is there some sort of like heat blooms or something that we can see in there that creates an identifiable designation as these alleged factories? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, so then what evidence is being presented to us that these things are actually happening, right? And so these kids started to actively question what was being presented to them on behalf of the State Department at that point, which you can say whatever you want about it, but if the goal is to help kids learn how to think critically, that's what I was doing. And again, I didn't tell anybody what to think, but if something's being presented and presented as concrete, like we got asked the question about evidence. So I went from West, I went to Horizon. We essentially went through the same process. One of the kids asked the same question. It sort of went the same direction, right? The following day, I went back to Horizon. And when I walked through the door, I was pulled aside. And I was instructed not to talk to kids about current events anymore. And I said, why? They said, well, you talked to these kids about this thing with regards to evidence yesterday. They went home and talked to their parents about it. The parents got pissed off and they called the school and gave us a bunch of hell. And I said, I didn't tell a kid what to think or how, I said, my responsibility here is to help them to think critically. I'm not telling them to vote Democrat or Republican. I'm not telling them this is wrong or right. I'm just talking about the concept of evidence. And I don't know of a clear-cut case of when that is a demonstration of critical thinking. She said, I don't care. You're not allowed to talk about international relations to them anymore. I said, then fucking fire me. And that's exactly what I said. I said, I'm not going to stop talking to them about this. I said, you hired me to do a job. I'm doing that job. Don't tell me to do it when it's convenient for you. She just looked at me, and it's odd because at some of the schools they loved it, because I could say the things that they couldn't say. But in this instance, they really tried to mute me, to silence me. And it was the end of the school year. They weren't going to fire me, and they didn't fire me. But long story short is, late for that probably, this sort of like is the crystal expression of our educational system right now. We say that we're going to do these things, these specific things, but again, it's only when it's convenient. And I don't even know, like, critical thinking what? Critical thinking where? I got no freaking idea. I mean, and this is the way that I see, and it doesn't matter whether it's, for young kids or all the way up to higher education. I don't know where there's any meaningful critical thinking in this system today.
Well, it's not just critical thinking. And while I do appreciate that, and I think if we started teaching them at a younger age, to question things like what they see on TV, that might be helpful. But it's not just critical thinking, at least in K through 12. It's just education, period. And it varies from district to district and state to state as to, what level a student is at and how much they know and how much they've learned. But our education system is not good. It's not doing well, and it's not strictly a minority thing or strictly a rich thing or strictly a poor thing. It's a shit thing. Now, granted, if you're in a neighborhood where the mill levy and property taxes are higher, then your school's probably going to be a little bit better than the one that doesn't have a solid tax base. But the fact is, they're not teaching these kids well, regardless of what district or state they're in. But even sadder than that is that a kid can be in one state and be 2 or 3 grades behind and then move to another state and be at or above grade level. That's an issue. But we're not talking about critical thinking when I say that, we're talking about reading, writing, and arithmetic, which are pretty important topics, um, or subjects, I should say. And you'd think that it would get better as you progress through the grade levels, but it doesn't. And honestly, I don't know if it got worse. Well, no, I know it got worse when No Child was left behind with Bush, but I don't know if it was already bad and it got worse and they just kind of put a band-aid on the problem by telling all of the districts that they need to teach the test. Um, but it's bad. I mean, I don't care if they pass the test, the state tests or not, when they can't write a sentence or do basic math or, you know, tell me the water cycle um, in the seventh grade, there's an issue. Um, and that's just K through 12. So, I mean, I don't know. Do you think I'm being cynical or are we way off base? Is it just critical thinking that's the
No, well,
issue?
when I bring up critical thinking, I'm just highlighting the fact that, I mean, that it's the ability for a kid, for us to value the concept of teaching a kid how to go through the process of developing their own thoughts and their own thinking. Like, you of course you need to be able to read, you need to be able to write, but I mean, reading, writing, and arithmetic, I mean, it's never even just as simple as that. Like, you brought up the point about testing. Like, this is, I mean, you think about, like, the moment that led into the No Child Left Behind. Like, I remember, like, the way that was being discussed on a national level during that time period, and the whole rhetorical disposition was: do we create federal standards where there are federal tests that are used throughout the country, or are there tests that we use that are created individual at the state level? I mean, this is literally the way that they were thinking about trying to fix an education system that was flailing, and like, it was straight up through this lens of testing, period. I mean, like, if you're trying to fix something and something becomes reducible to one solution, federal versus state testing, I mean, there's something incredibly obnoxious about that. There's this thing in education called the banking method, right? The banking method is when a person teaches so that a person can test well, and they don't necessarily retain any of that knowledge. They just prepare themselves for the moment so that they can test well, and it's all about the moment of the test. It's not about knowledge, it's not about thinking, it's just about hanging on to that for long enough so that you can get a decent grade on the test. Like, this is, like, hilarious. I mean, like, there's no education in testing. And I mean, and don't say that I'm saying that when you get educated that you shouldn't take tests. That's definitely not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, when you have a end all be all, like, solution or mechanism that's guiding something, then there are going to be all these other aspects to that. In education, you can have a more complicated, the human mind. Shit, we don't know shit about the human mind. We need to be more humble about these kinds of questions, but you cannot just do it. So, like, again, like, critical thinking, uh, it's just like, if we're going to succeed socially, we have to, like, learn how to think. I mean, how do we think? And it's, I mean, and if you can't think critically, you can't engage with the book. You can't sit there and then say, "Oh, that's fucking weird," and then write something in the margins. The margins are the part of a paper book. I know that those are things that are falling to the wayside, but you can still write on the margins of digital books as well. But
Yes, you can. So, I was just thinking while you were talking, and not everybody understands critical thinking. And I think it's because to some degree it's being beaten out of us. I don't think that they, want us thinking critically.
The royal day.
Part of thinking critically, at least in my opinion, is to be able to ask the question, well, why are we doing this? What's going to happen if we do that? Things like that. And they tell us at a fairly young age not to ask questions, because there's supposed to be this respect that's based on a title. So, don't question your teachers, don't question police officers, don't question judges, don't question
authority figures,
anybody who's in a supposed position of authority. Well, if you don't ask those people questions, then you're never going to ask a fucking question, because you're not going to be able to identify who the fuck is actually in authority and who isn't. Title does not create authority, and title should definitely not garner respect. Respect is something that is earned, not given.
Sorry, just reflecting back to our high school years as you were talking about that. Oof. We never had any problems with questioning authority back then, I don't think.
No, I generally haven't ever. And that's kind of why I've gotten into trouble the way that I have, but it's also the reason that I've gotten through a lot of shit that other people wouldn't have, because I knew that so-and-so didn't actually have as much authority as they presented themselves with, or any, for that matter. And don't get me wrong, if anyone is listening to this, I'm not saying be disrespectful to everyone that you meet. But again, just because they have a title doesn't mean you can't ask the question. Don't take everything someone says at face value. And at least being able to ask that first question or that second question will help you maybe start to process things a little bit better, and encourage your kids, encourage your nieces and nephews, grandkids. I don't fucking know how old you are. Whoever, encourage them to think critically, because if we don't, then certain people are still just going to be held down, because they're going to think, well, so-and-so told me, I guess it must be true. And Darren's talking about the train, from the satellite footage. Not only did we not know what was on the train, but that shit could have been shot in fucking Yosemite, California.
Anywhere.
It's not like it showed a fucking map. It's not like someone was standing there with a sign that said, I'm in Iraq. Even if they had a sign that said I'm in Iraq, they could have posted that person there. So it just
could have been photoshopped.
It's all bullshit. It could have been photoshopped.
It's funny because as a kid, I didn't have the same absolute willfulness in me when I was young. I was a true believer. I grew up Mormon. I believed. I believed in the institutions that I was connected to, and then a few things happened, and it sort of shook the core, and I started to have to go through the process of figuring it out for myself at that point in time. But when I was so I wasn't skeptical. I was straight up cynical, and I was fucking mad. So I didn't trust anybody at that point in time. And so when I went back to re-engage education on my own terms, sort of like when I had my radical epistemological break, like Descartes did when he, melted the universe away and started to ask questions, and started to rebuild it for himself. Except for I didn't bring God back in 13 pages. What a dipshit. Jesus, man. But having said that, when I went back to school and I was trying to find my footing again and doing it in my own way, when the critical side of things really started to engage, when I didn't just give the reverence to the teachers automatically when they had to earn it from me, and they did start when I found teachers that really were thinking and were presenting some things in an interesting way and were helping me to broaden my own horizons. Those teachers had a kind of respect for me that they still have today. Like when you develop that relationship, when you don't just bestow that on the position because the fact that it's been, they have the title, but they earn it. It like then you're really in a process at that point in time, and that means that it's richer. It means that it's more honest and it's real.
Well, and that's probably where you can identify a better teacher or professor than, the ones that are just your everyday, because there were times where I got in trouble for questioning my professors, or doubting them or proving them wrong, and that's part of education, and if you can show that teacher that this is the actual thing, or this is where some doubt should lie or whatever, and they don't scold you or reprimand you or basically knock you down grades because of the fact that you disagreed with them, those are good teachers, because at that point you are in an educational relationship and it's give and take, because no one person should be the teacher. We can all learn something from each other, and I don't mean to sound all fucking one world and we're all in love and we're all the same, and I'm Barney the dinosaur type shit. But that type of relationship is important because it is give and take. And you don't want, as far as I'm concerned, anybody in your life that isn't willing to make themselves better, regardless of title or position.
Yeah, you have to learn from, and yes, the best teachers. Like I remember when my daughter started growing up, and she would come at me, and I would back up because she showed me something that I hadn't seen before, and that really like took her to the side. I mean, she grew up in Douglas County, and Douglas County, in spite of the fact that they do have really big good tax bases, stuff you're talking about earlier, a little bit ago. I remember in her fifth grade class, she had 36 kids in it. So they were so heavily engaged in the voucher discussion that the public school system started to suffer a ton out there, and continues to, for that matter. And there are all kinds of other really weird dynamics in Douglas County that they're trying to get back to a certain space, but it's a tough thing. But she was so taken aside by the fact that I allowed myself to learn from her in front of her that she's like, wow, that's not the way that I'm used to education, because teachers just don't in the current system. And of course, she found a couple of them. You got it, but you got to dig. It's just a tough space right now to find any meaningful education.
No, it's like teachers are the cops of education. I mean, that's really what it is. They're for the most part bullies. They want to bully you into whatever it is they believe or what they've been taught, because most of them never asked any questions and they just moved through the fucking manufacturing machine to be a teacher. That's what somewhere along that machine it said you're a teacher, and they went and threw them out. I had a cousin who went to high school in one of the southern states, and she never questioned it, but her teacher told her it was the Sioux Indians.
What?
Yeah, I didn't know what the fuck she was talking about. It took me 2 or 3 sentences before I realized she meant Sue.
Yeah.
And so this poor girl, through at least a year of her high school, thought that it was Sukes. And who knows how many other fucking students, came out of there thinking that it was Sukes. But I'm sure that that's the kind of teacher, and I don't know, didn't know him. But I bet you if you would have said, no, it's not Sukes, it's Sue. The X is silent, you dumb fucking inbred hillbilly cocksucker. He probably would have been offended.
I think it would probably be a better, you approach it better if you leave out the inbred hillbilly cocksucker part.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Possibly.
I'm just spitballing here,
Yeah.
so.
So yeah, and I don't even know, maybe down there they don't even require a college degree or any education at all to become a teacher. Maybe it's just like one of those things where somebody stamps a form and you're a teacher. Because that differs from district to district and state to state.
Another thing that makes it tough for teachers, because I don't want to just demonize them. Ultimately, there are teachers that are out there that are trying to do but they are like one of the things that I saw with Jeannie when she was at
School,
Douglas County, was that they did not, because the testing stuff was so pervasive. So like they would do practice tests 4 times a year, right? They contracted to have these people come in and do it. And so this is literally 4 weeks, and then the 2-week time period where they had to actually take the test that they had to take that determined whether you were failing or you were succeeding, right? So she did it in 7th grade the first time, and then she came back to us and said they will allow us to sign off to not come to school for this time period because the testing that they're having us doing, a lot of parents are saying is obnoxious. And we signed for her to be home, and she was home and she was working on other stuff. But when a teacher is their ability to be many times in Douglas County, teachers lost their jobs because of the test scores of the students given the frame of that test. And I don't want a fucking teacher to be measured that way. I don't want them to be measured by some arbitrary test score. Like there's all kinds of problems with those tests. I mean, not just the cultural side of things. I mean, they're just you're trying to measure something that is really complicated. So and on top of that, the amount of money that you're paying out to have these companies come in and to conduct these tests, pretending that you're educating, like it's hard enough for a teacher to be a teacher, but now you're losing 6 weeks a year. You're losing 2 weeks, like I said, 2 weeks for the time period that they're doing the test, and then 4 weeks for when they're doing the preparation for these tests. And you have these giant private institutions that are making stupid amounts of money to essentially not educate anyone about anything. I just like it's really got to be tough being an educator in this day and age where we have this input output rubber stamp position on whether or not a person's succeeding at learning how to be a thoughtful member of society.
Well, I mean, they're gonna try to make money any way that they can, and you know what's really fucking stupid is I ditched most of my classes in high school, well, junior high too, for that matter. But finally, I was told, and I can't remember because it's been so long, but there were 2 dates. The principal of the high school basically came to me and said, "Hey, I just need you here 2 days a year. I don't care whether you come the rest of the time or not."
Days.
No, it wasn't test days.
But it's the count days.
It's the count days, and that's the days that
they get
based on body count, they get federal dollars. So, I mean, we've been monetized for a long time. They've just stretched it another step by monetizing the testing thing. Yeah.
Charlie Myers. He's deceased, so I can say that without.
Is he really?
I'm 98% sure. Yeah. Interesting guy.
But they've gone. We have all of these bullshit. I don't know. I don't even think you call them trade schools anymore, but proprietary education for healthcare workers of whatever stripe, and you know, airline workers and whatever. Those started off the whole thing, but now even regular colleges are basically turning you into a dollar sign.
Well, I mean, you like I think when I graduated in '01, and at Metro, I think I was paying about $1,500 a semester. And when I started, I think it was just under $1,000, right? So I mean, in a 6 year time period, it went up 50%. I mean, the cost of fucking education today is just outrageous. And when you have these institutions that want to lend money or have the ability to lend money and to lock people into that debt for the rest of their life without being able to declare bankruptcy. I mean, fucking Donald Trump could declare bankruptcy 5 times. Anybody can. I mean, it isn't just about Trump. It ain't a Republican and Democrat thing. If you have a corporation, if you have a private position, but if you want to get educated, you have to pay that money back one way or another. There's no way to. I'll tell you something funny. I mean, it's not funny, haha. But when I was an undergraduate, it was during the '90s, and they would have these tables up all over the place. They literally would just handing out fucking credit cards, giving you fucking $8,000 worth of, $10,000, $12,000 worth of lines of credit, right? So my partner and I at that point in time, I was the one that would get the credit cards. We essentially between '96 and '02 lived off those credit cards, and I filed bankruptcy later on after that. And to be honest with you, I don't feel one bit sorry for having done that because I used it to get a degree. I wasn't trying, and what my intention wasn't to defraud anything or anything like that, but I didn't want to go and get a bunch of student loans at that point in time. I got one my last semester for $1,000. That one is the only one that I have that's paid back. But yes, it is. It is. It is. I mean, proprietary education, the whole system, big fucking business in higher education.
Yeah, and I don't think that you get any more out of it than you did at K through 12 necessarily. And if you can't think critically, then you don't get shit out of it. And thinking critically only gets you slightly more. But I mean, for the most part, they're not teaching you. I think what Matt Damon said it in
Goodwill Hunting.
Goodwill
Yes.
Hunting. He said, I got the same knowledge that you did for the price of a couple overdue books or whatever.
$1.50 and overdue
Yeah.
fines. Yeah.
And that's the thing is that if you want the knowledge, it's out there. What you do with it is an entirely different thing, and whether or not you can show that knowledge out in the real world is another thing too, because sometimes having that piece of paper does help. Not always. And now in today's job market, a lot of people are asking for master's degrees and doctorates and
the magical MBA.
Yeah, well, not even necessarily an MBA. Those are for a lot of them, but I mean MFAs and all of the different master's programs that are out there. So I don't know. I think education is important. I don't think that you necessarily have to go out and spend $100,000 for it. You do have public libraries in your area.
But there's no doubt, like if you're trying to be competitive and you're trying to fill out, resumes, applications, curriculum vitae, you if you don't have if you don't cross a few boxes, then you're going to be overlooked. If you didn't engage in the process and put yourself in a certain amount of debt to make sure that you can be a good contributing member of society.
That is a true statement. I don't know that any of the people I know that have these big fancy degrees are better at contributing to society. Most of them I know are complete fucking idiots. One of my old bosses thought that the thing in the middle of the road was a medium. And for those of you listening, I hope you know that medium is a size.
medium is not the same thing as median.
Right. And he thought that it was a medium in the middle of the road. Now, if you have your master's degree, you should know that that is a median and not a medium.
And if you don't know that, then you're below medium.
Right. You're a fucking dolt. And so that brings me around again to wondering about the quality of the education to begin with. If you can get a master's degree and you don't know that, then how valuable is the degree to the people that hire you, to you who spent all the money for it, and now to society, because you're supposed to be this educated person that's contributing, and you're a fucking dolt. Not an adult, a dolt.
You might be an adult. But
yes.
So part of my big issue with the existing education system is that all logics of knowledge become subjugated to the logic of markets, right? So that means that the market itself dominates. Education becomes secondary at that point in time. And that is incredibly problematic. It's more about the thing that you purchase, the thing that the marketability of the thing itself than it is the substance of the thing itself. And education is one of those things. It's like medicine, right? Like if all of medicine becomes subjugated to the marketplace. A lot of people get diabetes, so you're going to find cures for things like diabetes. But when you get these weird cancers, you're not going to find the solutions to them because you're not going to be able to make a ton of money off of them. Meaning that if the true goal of healthcare is health, then, and I'm not saying the market needs to go away. I'm just saying that the market, like if you're going to create the market has to be subjugated to the goal of the actual thing itself. The market cannot dominate health for healthcare. Health has to dominate the market in the same way that education cannot be dominated by the market. The logic of education has to be the primary mover of the thing. And right now, everything when it comes to this, the marketplace dictates everything. I mean, the lending of money in relation to it, it's particularly in higher ed, the reproduction of the. I was telling Brian a story before we started. I started graduate school in Toronto at a school called York. But when I completed my coursework, it was at UC Denver. And while I was there, I completed my coursework. I mean, I hadn't had a B in so long. I don't even know. I got an A- in one class. This is just a little tangent, but it kind of relates back to something you said earlier. We had a master's prep class. We had to do 4 writing assignments for the class, and 3 of them were lit reviews. And one of them, one of the professors who was a world-class idiot, he had this book that it was his book that he had produced that he was selling. He actually had the audacity of bringing in an order form. He said, "These are really great Christmas gifts and birthday gifts. So buy more of them and give them out as gifts." I read the book. He had one really good chapter on meritocracy, where he's basically made this pretty nuanced argument about how people who don't have a certain level of knowledge should not be allowed to participate in democratic systems. And if a child passes this test, then they should be able to participate because they're smart enough to affect certain outcomes inside of that system itself. Whether you like that idea or not, the way that he made the argument in the book was pretty interesting. But in the second half of the book, he talked a bunch about Marx, and I think that the only thing he ever read in his life was the Manifesto, and then he read Marx through other people's lens, which is always this ridiculous caricature. Like if you're gonna read or write about somebody, you need to get grounded in their literature, and he was not very good at that. So when I wrote his paper, I totally fucking punished him on this paper, and just like, but again, it was grounded in literature. Like I like Marx. I know what I'm reading. I know what I'm writing about. So um, his last name was Cummings, and it was two M's. And throughout the paper, I spelled it with one M. And when he gave me the paper back, he wrote only one line on the back of it. And he said, if you're going to take issue with my Marx interpretation so much, you should at least spell my name correctly. And he gave me a B- on the paper. So I went to Christoph, he was one of the guys that was on my committee. And he was the one that was the really good writer, helped me to write. And he gave me an A- in the class. And I was like, Christoph, how do you give me an A-? Because on all my lit reviews, and he graded all those ones, I had perfect scores on them, and he was a tough grader. I said, Christoph, how many people? And he said, well, I asked him, I said, why you give me an A-? He said, well, you got a B- on the paper for Mike. And I said, how many people got perfect scores in all your lit reviews, Christoph? And he just looked at me and he said, you. I said, well, he said, okay, I'll give you an A. So he changed my grade to an A. But again, that shit doesn't really matter that much. The point is that when I was going through my process when I completed my coursework, I was writing the thesis. My chair, awesome lady, really was instrumental in trying to help me get it situated and get me thinking about shopping around, how to shop around, and was facilitating this process for me. And the other person who's on my committee, who is I will remain unnamed, when I came to her about criticisms, because when you're going through the process, right, and something like that, you get, they're going to help you to shape it out, and some are better than others at doing that. Some have questionable motives, but she told me that if I didn't include, because there was this thing about transnational capitals class that I had in my paper, and she wanted me to include this stuff that she had written on micro credit in relation to India, where she used that term. And I said, this has nothing to do with what I'm writing about. She said, I don't care, it's what I'm writing about. And basically told me that if I didn't include her work in my lit review, that she wasn't going to sign off on my thesis. And like that was the nail in the coffin for me for higher education. Like, it demonstrated to me that she thought that my stuff was going to sell, and she wanted to get her name on it. So she wanted me to include her in that. And that's the market, that's the market dominating the substance. And I can't be a party to that. I need to be an educator or participate in being educated. I'm not going to subjugate to myself. Maybe I'm too proud, but fuck that shit.
No, anyway. It doesn't have anything to do with pride. And I think anybody with some scruples would have said the same fucking thing. But that's the issue, really. I mean, is, your professor saying, here's an order form, they make great gifts. Well, they don't make fucking great gifts. There's no fucking way your grandma wants a book written by one of your professors about fucking Marx. When I started going to school, I was probably even more romantic than I am now. I know I was, because just life has made me more and more cynical. But, I knew that there was a problem when I signed up for my classes, and I think 2 out of 6 of them, I had to buy the teacher's fucking book in order to go to that class. And why a school would allow for that to be one of the prerequisites before you can go to that class is fucking retarded. Because
it's short bushish.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some serious problems. And, like on this thing, in episode 1, Darren talked about my book. I might do some more shameless plugs throughout this time period, but there's two things with that. One, I'm not making you fucking listen to this. And two, I'm not telling you that you're going to get a fucking degree and a better job because of this. You shouldn't have to buy my book. But if you want to, it's called Off the Grid, the Catalyst.
we're on episode 5. I think that in the annals of shameless plugs, I think that's pretty low, brother. I don't think that you're I mean, if you were that professor, then you would have attached something to the back end of this that in order form or something like that.
Yeah, here, give this to your grandma. Actually, my grandma probably would have liked the book.
Grandma was cool, dude.
So I mean, I don't know. I've got a problem with higher education for a couple of different reasons. Some of them I mentioned, some of them Darren mentioned, but I don't want to paint every professor with this shit brush. The only thing I will say in me closing this out is you got to ask the questions to whoever. Why, what, who, when, how. Pretend you're a journalist, but ask the questions, and then maybe you can process the information after that, but at least asking, you're halfway there. Thanks. Fuck off.
Yeah, I mean, we are both big believers in education. We just are not really in love with the way that the system functions on any level right now. So no matter what, the beginning of fixing that process is understanding the process of learning in the first place. We need to know how to we ask those questions. We need to know how to think, and we got to prioritize that process. Otherwise, you're just sort of locked in a maze, and you're not going to get anywhere. So you'll never get out of this maze. You'll never get out of this maze.
Rise up, people. Get out of the maze. Get out of the maze. Get off the 13th floor. Get out of the matrix. Anyway, we probably should wrap things up. Did you have anything else besides get out of the maze?
No, I proselytized enough, I think, at this point on this one. So,
all right. Well, thanks for listening to us rant and rave about education, or the lack thereof, or the little bit there was. I don't know. Anyway, I'm Brian Courtney.
I'm Darren Jolly, 720-334. Roll.
Roll, bitches, roll. Thanks. Hasta luego.
Indeed.